43. You may have been wondering, what is the purpose of life? And if you've ever watched the, what's that show called? The Galaxy Show. Anyway, it's 42, but I've got 43 bits of feedback here. And today, my promise to you is I'm going to not just be vulnerable sharing feedback that I've received on my speaking, but be able to share some things with you that will allow you to use feedback as fuel. Now, one of the nice things about learning from somebody else's mistakes, specifically mine, is you will be able to take some of these principles and apply it to your own speaking, your own communication skills. You ready for this? 43 bits. This morning, instead of going right live at 8 a.m., I looked through all the feedback I'd received over the last year from speaking, all the different ways that people have seen me and noticed where I struggled. And I created a document that had every single bit of issues that I was experiencing. And I found 4 patterns, which is a little frustrating for me. I'm so blind in those, but I was excited to share exactly what ways you can actually take some feedback that I got and start applying it to your own life. So check this out. The first thing I noticed was appearance. This was something that I definitely have been working on. I exercise very consistently, but one of the things that was brought up was your appearance doesn't always match your message. I was like, oh, that hurts. It hurts. That little bit of flab, it hurts. Need to get that taken care of. But does that mean that you can't share your message because you're a work in progress? No, it just means, you know what? We have to be doing our very best, and that's part of this process of growth. So it's not just what you physically are looking like, it's also what you wear. So very consistently, I've been wearing a polo shirt, being my very best as far as making sure my hair looks good. I shave before I hop on these, but sometimes you don't get to be dressed perfectly professionally, but you still have a message you need to deliver. And for me, it's more important to make sure that you get the message out than it is to have the perfect appearance. Because if you always have to look perfect, you have to have the makeup on, you have to have your hair perfect, sometimes that moment disappears. So even though I do accept that feedback of you have to make sure that your appearance is on point with your message, sometimes the message is so important you still need to get it out, even if you're in a t-shirt and shorts, which I've had a handful of times. All right. This other thing that I thought was interesting with appearance was I noticed sometimes people say, hey, you close off your body language. And this was something that was a blind spot for me. I often will lean in and close off my body language with an elbow like this, which a lot of times that is just listening. But every once in a while, I close my arms. I thought it was interesting. I had 3 different times this year where people are like, hey, you fold your arms a lot. It's like, I can do better at staying open with my body language. It's a cool hack and something that I've been working on. Next one was to avoid distractions. I've got a story with this one. A few weeks ago, I woke up and my little daughter, Dottie, she also woke up very early. We were going to Toastmasters, and instead of saying no to her coming with me, she was so insistent and wanted to come so bad. My whole role that day was just to take the time. Very easy. I was like, oh, no problem. I've got coloring that you can do on my phone. If you get bored, you can listen. You can sit on my lap the whole time, so it won't be a big deal. When I get to Toastmasters that morning, it was a little bit chilly. She had her jacket on. We had both of our speakers that were supposed to be speaking at that meeting cancel last minute. And they said, does anyone have a pocket speech? And me, I love coming prepared. And I said, well, I'm willing to go, but I do have my daughter here. I'm like, that's fine. Go ahead. And I got to experience what it's like to be very distracted while I was speaking. I shared a great story. And about 2 minutes in, Dottie started bouncing up and down and got out of the seat and came, and she's like, I need to go to the bathroom. And I told her, honey, you're the priority here. So I stopped my speech. I went and I helped her use the restroom. And then we came back and I said, I'm totally fine if we want to start where I'm at right now, or We can move on, or I'm happy to restart. And they're like, just restart. We're totally fine. Go ahead and restart. And I shared that story. And while she was bouncing around, the whole context of that speech that I had prepared was having difficult conversations, having conversations with people sometimes that are smelly or they don't look really great. Maybe they are doing something that is extremely repulsive, and you have to have those uncomfortable conversations. That was one of those times where my evaluator, they said, you know what, your daughter was a little distracting today, but you handled it really well. And she gave me some great feedback saying, this is how you can make this less distracting. Bring a physical coloring book, not just on your phone. Help her feel comfortable in the corner or somewhere else if she doesn't want to engage. And then talk with her about it. And I saw this was such a simple but actionable thing for me to do. So if I bring my daughter to Toastmasters or to another meeting, I can give her an activity that makes sense for her. So appearance is extremely important. Your health and vitality, if you think about the infinity model, health and vitality, your appearance, all of the different things that you do with your physicality, they do impact your message. This other thing has popped up 4 different times in these 43 evaluations. One of them was set up your stage for yourself. Now, for my podcast, pretty easy. I'm here at my house. I set up the stage, make sure I've got the lights, the camera, the microphone. And as I set up my stage here digitally, it's pretty easy for me to connect with everybody. But every once in a while, you don't set up the stage correctly, there are elements that you miss. So I was really grateful for that. Sometimes they said, hey, push the lectern out of the way if you're not going to be using it. Make sure you have your visual aids set up, whatever that looks like. Remove the distractions as much as possible. When you remove the distraction, you can stay in action. All right, the next thing is content. This was something that was interesting for me because I tend to gravitate towards stories. And every once in a while, I'll share a story and they say, you know what? You have a great seed concept, but you don't always nurture it into the story and bring it back around. I think, oh man, in my storytelling framework, yes, I do need to translate this for my audience better. One of the reasons I have that framework is for me just as much as it's for you, to make sure that whatever it is that you're listening to, it means something for your audience, not just for you as the speaker. So seeding concepts at the very beginning and framing it in a way that lets your audience say, oh, wow, I see where this applies to me. And when I'm creating content, and if I have a specific issue in my transition, I need to find different ways to transition so that I don't lose my audience. Another thing that was brought up was reiterations. Sometimes I process things so quickly that I forget that I need to repeat with variation. Repetition with variation is the mother of all learning. If you only repeat, it gets redundant and, well, people fall asleep. But when you have variation, it allows your audience to process. That was something that was brought up 2 or 3 different times in these. The next thing was get the connection to your core desire faster. What this means is if you have a core desire at a 100 scale out of 100, I'm referencing this book, The DNA of Success by Jack Zufelt right now. If you have that true core desire, something that is white hot burning inside of you, that is the thing that your audience wants. That's what you want to share as well. If you can help bridge that gap from where you are or where they are to their core desire through your content, through a story, that bridge, that connection, that's where all of the value comes from, solving that problem that leads to their core desire. It's really great for me to hear. Sometimes I do bridge that gap, but it takes so long that people forget. I need to tie it back. So what's the core desire here for you? You want to be a more confident person on and offline in every conversation that you're having. What does that do for you? Being able to accept feedback and not get upset about it, but say, you know what? I'm curious. Why did this appear the way that it did? What's the content that I'm sharing and how is it helping my friends, my family be able to improve themselves? How am I improving? If you don't assess what that feedback looks like and apply it, even if you're saying, I'm not going to apply all 90 things, I'm going to apply this one thing. As you apply those principles, it gets better. Me, I'm all about creating great, evocative, meaningful content, but sometimes I do get a little distracted. I want to make sure that my content is very helpful for you. So the first thing was about appearance. Second was about content. I got a lot more with this one. The transitions between content and stories, ensure the connections are clear. This was something that was brought up 2 or 3 different times. Sometimes we have these wonderful stories, and if we don't bridge that gap for people, there is a disconnect. And often I've noticed in my own content, every once in a while, I will process things a little too quickly, and I don't give my audience time to process that content. I don't give them the opportunity to let that seed get planted and then flourish. The next thing is, they said, use more complex sentence structures. For me, I don't know how I feel about that. I actually enjoy simplicity. Every once in a while, you do want to be more evocative in the way that you share your sentences, and you want to make sure that you perform your professionalism in all of the different language that you use. But most of the time, even though this feedback I think is accurate, that I do tend to use simpler sentence structures, I don't always agree with that. So you have to listen to feedback, but you also can say, you know what? I appreciate what you said, but I'm going to do this because I want to make sure that I help more people. And if I talk at too high of a level as far as linguistically or in my sentence structure being so convoluted that people cannot understand me, I'm going to lose people. Next thing was write out your goals of your speech before presenting. This is something that I struggle with when I'm doing a pocket speech, which is funny because I had about 4 of these speeches that I got feedback on that other people did not show up. So I stepped up. And if you don't have a specific purpose for receiving feedback, you're going to get whatever people ask for. So one of the ways I've been able to combat this has been something that's popped up a couple times, is I say, what was the message that you received from my story? Or what was the message you received from my speech? Now, what are you going to do because of it? I care more about those 2 things than any other bit of feedback I get. Because if you receive the message I was doing my best to deliver, and you're going to do something by listening and doing that call to action, I created value for you in your life. You'll never be the same if you apply it. That's what I really want to know. The next thing was add personal examples of applying the concepts. This whole thing is being a little vulnerable for me because sometimes I have so much excitement about what I'm learning. I don't always take it back and peel back the curtain and say, you know what, this is how I'm applying it. So today, I read through all 43 of these, every single word on them. I data dumped this onto a Word document, and I just, without filtering, just typed up the things that were issues. I actually didn't care about the nice things they said about me. I just looked at where are the warts, where are the bad blemishes in my speaking, and what can I do about it? So I wrote all those down. I had 40 something different points, and then I dropped those into ChatGPT and I said, help me see my blind spots. I read through that. It was like a 4-page document. I was like, oh, dang it. And then I had them iterated again. What are the things I need to know about appearance? Okay, cool. What are the things I need to know about content? And I've got 2 more for you about performance and measurable outcomes. But what I noticed was if you break it into patterns, you can see things more clearly. Now, the last thing with this content section was finding ways that you can make your content relevant and actionable. And part of this goes into the measurable outcomes, which we'll talk about in just a moment. With number 3, it's performance. Now, with performance, I tend to get really excited. I speak very quickly, and I noticed probably 8 or 9 times people said, you really need to slow down more. Allow your audience to process what you said. Ooh, what does that do? That allows every single one of your words to pay their own way. I do feel like I have quite great vocal variety, but every once in a while, I tend to be at the higher register, and the faster speech that I have makes it so that every once in a while, people that process a little bit slower don't always catch every word. So that is a pacing issue that has now been removed from that blind spot of mine. Now, when I'm talking about practicing pacing, what I'm saying here is sometimes the pace in which you are running or the pace in which you're speaking needs to be varied depending on the story, depending on what your audience is expecting, and also what the content is. So if you're going to be varying your performance, this is something that every single one of us can do. We figure out what elements of my performance need to be highlighted and which elements don't. Because when we place the focus where it needs to be, the increased focus allows us to be better and do better. But if we focus on things that are not important, everything gets muddled. All right. Keeping this on the performance side of the feedback, they said I need to mix up my energy because I have this tonality or this same feeling all the way throughout what I do. So I thought, well, I'm going to apply that feedback right now. How do I make this podcast feel a little different? I made sure that I had data points to go off of, 43 of them. And then I processed this and I thought, how do I make this valuable for other people, not just for me? Because feedback is fuel for growth. And if you want to fuel your growth, you have to find where are those patterns of progress. We're talking about the performance section here. And if you really want to perform well, it doesn't happen overnight. I love being able to help other people, but sometimes I need to help myself. I need to raise that awareness of where am I losing my audience? What are the things that I can do to help you help yourself? Because I may be a storytelling genius. I do air quotes because I'm always getting better. But how can I instill that genius into you? Take what I know, take what I do, and package it in such a way that you can also improve your performance. So I think dive even deeper here. Sometimes we have these moments where we forget what we were going to say. Don't let your audience know. That was something that was brought up twice. I had this speech where I was talking about loaded or load-bearing leadership. I actually did an entire podcast episode about it with Greg Kimball. Go check that one out. But I forgot what one of the acronyms were in the middle of the speech because it was a relatively new speech to me. And almost all the feedback was, hey, when you forget something, don't let us know. Just go on to the next thing and bring it back when you remember. And I know that, but if you knew it, you would do it. I'm going to decline that. Now, the next thing with this one, this is so key. When you are thinking about performance, there has to be visuals that make sense. In this one, I just decided to use visuals like this. I also use the visuals like a physical book. You may use visuals that are like whiteboards, or you could use visuals that are a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes I'll drop banners on my podcast like this. That's one way that I change the visual experience. But getting clear on what is it that you're trying to accomplish by bringing up this visual, that's so key. I rarely use PowerPoint because it is a visual aid. It is not a crutch for me. A lot of speakers, they get stuck that if they don't have that visual aid crutch of PowerPoint, they will not be able to communicate their message. And if you can clearly say, this is what I'm going to deliver, this is what I want to make sure it gets across, and you can put it in your body, for me, that's extremely valuable. But some people need to visually process. So the feedback that I got from that was you need to use more visuals. You need to put some whiteboarding up or write down what it is that you're saying so people can see it. I thought, wow, I can use that on my podcast. I can be better about this. You want to see what visual I'm using right now? Check this out. Here's my notes. Boom. That's the visual that I'm using right now to get these ideas out here. The next thing that was extremely important with your performance is filler words. Now, if you're thinking, what is a filler word? That is language that is verbal clutter. Ums, ahs, ers. So, my friend Debbie, she's like, you used the word so to start a lot of sentences. I wonder if there's another way you could start sentences. And it's like, ow, okay, I feel it. Oh, I can do this. And I have been working on it. Every once in a while, I start with and as a sentence. And I think, is there another way to say that sentence? As you get better at performing, a lot of that verbal clutter goes away because you have higher clarity in what you're doing. Every time I perform, I think, what do I need to do to make sure my message is communicated as clearly as possible? If it's not clear, I'm not being kind. If I focus on the jargon that I know, or I'm speaking in a language that you don't understand, I'm only edifying myself. But as soon as I make sure that I put the framework in place so that you can understand, it makes it more meaningful. Why is this feedback so important with performance? What it means for you is if you can raise your performance and level up your performance, people aren't going to be worrying so much about how you say it. They'll be worrying more about what you say. What if your message could make that deep of an impact? That's my goal. I want to make sure that the message of feedback is fuel, isn't just something that I took away today because I got a bunch of value from creating this and processing it and then delivering it, teaching it to you. You can do the same thing. If you want feedback, go ask for feedback, but be very, very careful who you listen to. There are sometimes you will get feedback that you can just let go in one ear and out the other, because if those people are not where you want to be and doing what you want to do, some of that feedback will not be helpful. But those people are where you want to be. They have the skills and they have the results that you want. Really pay attention. Now, this last section is so essential. This is the fourth section of my feedback patterns that I recognized over these 43 painful and yet absolutely essential pieces of growth for me. Is measurable outcomes. How do you measure your outcomes? How do you measure the things that you struggle with? I'm curious, if you could measure it, what would that look like? One of the ways that I have done that is I don't get rid of the feedback that people give me. I measure how much of this have I applied. Let's look. One of the things that was brought up was, how often do you circle back to the opening engagement question and complete the loop? That tells me not only once, but multiple times I have given an engagement question and not clearly answered it. And sometimes I've answered it so quickly that I didn't give people time to process. So, what was the question at the top of this? How is feedback fuel for you? How is it fueling your growth? Are you afraid of feedback? Is feedback meaning that you're a failure? No. Every single one of us make mistakes. It's not a big deal unless we keep making the same mistake over and over and over and over again, because that's insanity. And we don't want to do that. With measuring your outputs, it also comes with recognizing what are your inputs. One of the things that was brought up often was I use a lot of personal stories in the output of what I'm doing on stage. That's really important. But for people to find value in it, it can't just be a personal story. It needs to be a personal story with relevance to your audience. You have to relate, otherwise, people will say, why does that story matter? Like, cool story, bro. Part of this is making sure that as we communicate clearly about what we are trying to accomplish, we can say, did what I said I was going to do actually create value for someone? Was the problem that they wanted solved actually solved by the end? A lot of the ideas that I shared, even on this podcast, I guarantee if you go and start using this type of intensity with your feedback and say, what are the things that I can learn from this? This was the experience. This is the data. Now what? If you do the processing and the organizing and take the action necessary, you can get better. I am literally a better speaker today because I went through those evaluations and then processed it and figured out how can I deliver this in a way that will be meaningful for my audience, you. You can do the same thing. Anytime you get feedback, consider the source and consider what can I do because of it. If you take extreme ownership of that, you say, I want to make sure this outcome is accomplishing what I want, you can look at what happened and say, this is the result I got. This is the fruit or the whole goal. We're going to say consequences. Ho is what comes after, goal is fruit. If you got the consequences or the results, you get to choose, is this the consequences that I want? If not, you have to trace it back to where that impetus is, the starting point, that inflection point, whatever the start of that choice was, and say, what is it that is creating that consequence? I want to change that behavior, because if I change that behavior, I will change the result, and the whole goal or the consequence will shift. What are the outcomes that you want? Not what are the outcomes that you don't want. If you focus on what you do want, you will start to get it. If you focus on what you don't want, you'll also start to get it. One of the other elements of this is to make sure that you give people time to process and digest the information. That's something that was brought up multiple times, and sometimes I don't give you guys enough time to think. I apologize. But what can you do about it? You could pause it. Whenever you have outcomes that aren't quite in alignment with what you want, just come back to what that trigger point is. What is the action? And then figure out, is that something that I want to continue getting as far as the outcome? I hope this has been helpful for you, making sure that you can understand how appearance impacts your message, how content and the way that you structure that content will positively or negatively impact your audience, as well as making sure that your performance is on point so it doesn't become a distraction for your audience. And then the last element is measuring your outputs. God, I'm still trying to figure this thing out. I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, but I felt like this was really helpful. And if you thought it was helpful, go ahead and like and follow this. Subscribe, because every single Thursday I'm going to show up for you. Even if my guest doesn't show up, which happened today. And I was like, you know what? I'm still going to have feedback, because I have to own that. If I don't make sure that everyone is on point and knows what's going on and they don't have backups, it's on me. And what's cool is when you get feedback and you say, I can own this, you can do something about it. But if you say, well, it's somebody else's fault, they didn't look at their calendar, this didn't work, you start bickering, you get the results of the bickering, and that is not something that you may want. I hope that this has been very valuable for you. Go and utilize feedback as fuel for your growth. I promise, as you do, you will be able to find more areas of improvement than you even realized. And if you really want to level up your life, it comes down to recognizing and having awareness of those blind spots. That's why you want a mentor. That's why you want to connect with someone like myself that can help you see where you haven't been able to see before, to light the warts of worry that come out when you are wanting to communicate your message. If you have the anxiety that wells up inside of you because you don't know how to put your ideas together in a cogent, simple manner and deliver it to your audience. I hope that you will reach out to me and we can find some ways that feedback will be able to create fuel for your growth. Now, a call to action for this one, I challenge you, whether you send it to me or you send it to somebody else, take whatever story you're working on, whatever piece of content you're like, man, this is a burning desire of mine to make sure that this idea gets out of my head onto paper. I dare you to record yourself. And after you record yourself, watch it and look, what is that feedback telling you? You will be able to notice things that no coach can tell you, because when you hear how you sound, when you see how you perform, when you recognize what the content is, and you look at the outcome, what was the result of that? Suddenly, you can start to grow. And if you do feedback in a way that allows you to find things that you can control and take action on, say, you know what, this is something I can take action on. Eventually, you will not recognize your life in 18, even 19 months. It'll be drastically different because of the people you talk to, because of the content you've created, because of the ideas you've been able to clarify, because of the way you've been able to perform. Your outcomes will be different. I hope this is helpful. Find a bunch of fun in recording yourself and doing these things. Have a great rest of your day, guys. God bless. Oh, there it is. There it is.